Good morning, everyone. Pastor Michael Enderman here from the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer in Ramsey and Vice Pastor of Calvary Lutheran Church in Allendale, New Jersey. And I'm coming to you in the week of October 5th. And I'm sharing with you a psalm for the week. And this is Psalm 84. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts! My soul longs, indeed it faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young. At your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Happy are those who live in your house, ever singing your praise. Happy are those whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. As they go through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools. They go from strength to strength. The God of gods will be seen in Zion. O Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Behold our shield, O God. Look on the face of your anointed. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than live in the tents of wickedness. For the Lord God is a sun and shield. He bestows favor and honor. No good thing does the Lord withhold from those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, happy is everyone who trusts in you. From a little research I did, I learned that this psalm is probably a pilgrim song, a hymn that pilgrims would sing as they approached Jerusalem from outside the city. Many times a year, there were opportunities for villagers and townspeople from around the area to travel on foot, to go to Jerusalem, to go up to the temple and make sacrifices and worship. And so this psalm is written for them. It's a wonderful image of people walking and looking toward Zion, which is the name of Jerusalem, and longing for it. My soul longs, indeed it faints for the courts of the Lord. The courts of the temple are the precincts around the temple where pilgrims could gather, and depending on who you were in relation to the Jewish religion, you could go farther into the temple, into the inner courts as well. Even the sparrow finds a home, and the swallow a nest for herself. So the temple is seen as a place of sanctuary and refuge. Happy are those who live in your house, ever singing your praise. The temple was imagined as the dwelling place of the God of Israel. And what that entails is that although God is known to occupy heaven, so to speak, that's the place where God's full divine presence is. The Israelites also believed that there was a place on earth where God's presence was also known and felt. And that was in the temple, where you might say the divine presence of God and the earthly realm overlapped most powerfully. And that was in the temple precincts in Jerusalem. And that is a note in my student Bible, my Lutheran student Bible, raises the idea of the sacraments. In Lutheranism, we practice 2 sacraments of the church, baptism and Holy Communion, and both entail a physical substance with the promise of God. So we have water and the promise of God in baptism. We have bread and wine and the promise of Christ's presence with us. Both sacraments give us God's grace and Christ's presence fully with us. And so drawing a parallel to the temple in the ancient conception of it, in ancient Judaism, God's presence was there also. And so the temple could be seen as a sanctuary, a place for the dwelling of God, but also a sacrament or a sacramental place where God's presence was known and felt for those who would bring faith to that encounter. So we too share in the idea that God dwells in physical things as well. God deigns to or agrees to be present with us in the world. most fully in the presence of Jesus Christ for Christians. And so for Christians, God, Jesus Christ, this historical human man, was a full sacrament of God's presence in the world. The true, in the similar way to the temple, a place where God's physical presence and God's presence, divine presence, and the physical being of creation overlap very, very fully and powerfully. So there's a lot in there that's interesting to think about. But we basically use and fall back on words like these in the Psalms to remind us of God's place in the world with us. So that's the main key, is that God is with us and for us. And that's what we want to hold on to. And that's why we use these words in worship. Even though the original author is talking about the physical temple in Jerusalem, we now use it in a metaphorical sense, in a symbolic sense, to talk about God's presence with us in the world. For Christians, in the presence of Jesus Christ, who is risen, Christians believe. Then in the last stanza, for a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than live in the tents of wickedness. And so the pilgrim here is singing about wanting to be, just let me be near the temple, Lord. Just let me get near it. In the outer courts of the temple, I'll hang out there, and that's good enough for me. Being being in the outer courts, of course, is not in the inner courts of the temple. So you still have a distance to go to get to the Holy of Holies, the sanctum of the temple. But for this pilgrim song, just to be in the city itself is, of course, a blessing and full of grace for the people who gather there. But to be in the outer courts of the temple is good enough, almost, the pilgrim says. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God. I'll stand outside the door of the temple. That's good. That's better than being in the tents of wickedness, and that would mean, doing and shunning the place of God and the values of God, and rather going over to selfishness and greed and all of the vices that we associate with wickedness. The pilgrim is being reminded here, follow your heart to God. Let your heart, in these words of verse 5, let your heart have a highway to Zion in it. Happy are those whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Let your heart have a highway to God, to God's presence. Imagine a path in your heart that you, in your meditation, in your prayer life, can get onto every day and travel in your heart and in your mind and in your meditation to God's presence, who is really right there with you when you get on the path, immediately. And we believe in the grace of God, and God is even with us when we've fallen off the path, for God is always with us. So may these words and this psalm be a blessing to you this day and this week.